In this set of PowerPoint slides, I'm going to talk about neuroses. A person suffering from neurosis knows that they have a problem. Their behavioral and perceptual strategies just aren't working very well for them anymore, and they're overwhelmed by anxiety. They're fearful, they're unhappy, and they need help. When we're talking about neuroses, we're essentially talking about anxiety disorders. And there are several different forms that this can take. Generalized anxiety disorder is when a person is just walking around in a high state of anxiety all of the time, and it becomes very hard for them to focus on work, relationships, and other important things. Panic disorder are attacks of terror, and these attacks can last a few seconds or up to a couple of hours. People who have these panic attacks often are afraid that they're dying, they think they're having a heart attack, or at least they're afraid that they're going crazy. They may have trouble breathing, they hyperventilate. Panic disorder is more common in women, and in fact, anxiety disorders in general are more common in women than they are in men, although men certainly suffer from them. There are also very specific phobic disorders. Agoraphobia. People sometimes think that this is just a fear of going outside or a fear of wide open spaces, but what it really is a fear of being alone in a public place. People are afraid that they might have a panic attack. They're afraid that they might, in some way or other, be overwhelmed by anxiety in front of all these people. And so they don't like going to unfamiliar places. They don't like being surrounded by strangers. And that's what agoraphobia is really all about. It's a form of social phobia, but there are other social phobias. People who have a social phobia worry about being embarrassed and humiliated in front of other people. And their uneasiness in social situations can be so strong that they panic. They might not even be able to speak to people. Consequently, they become very anxious if they're meeting new people. They don't like eating or speaking in public. They may avoid public restrooms. They generally avoid social contact, especially with people that they don't know. Now, of course, you're well aware that people can have very specific phobias as well. You can be afraid of spiders, that's arachnophobia. You can have fear of enclosed spaces, claustrophobia. You might be afraid of snakes, you might be afraid of heights. One of my favorites is a new one called coulrophobia, fear of clowns. And so for a fun video on this, feel free to click on the picture of the clown. And also in this category of neuroses are obsessive compulsive disorders, often known as OCD, somatoform disorders, and dissociative disorders. Obsessive compulsive disorders are marked by a connection between an obsessive thought that's very anxiety arousing, which leads to a compulsive behavior that we engage in to try to deal with that anxiety. So you get this thing in your head that you can't get rid of, and it obsesses you, and you engage in compulsive behaviors to try to eradicate it. The obsessions usually center on some kind of doubt or uncertainty that you have, or it could center on a fear that you might do something really shocking and embarrassing and prohibited. There are many different types of obsessive compulsive behaviors. Some of the most common categories are counting, checking, cleaning, and avoidance. Counting is one where the person obsessively counts and keeps track of things. They might be the tiles in the ceiling in the room that you're in. It might be the people in the crowd around you if you're out in public, but you just keep counting over and over and over again. And it's very distressing if you don't come up with the same number each time. I always think of the Sesame Street character, the Count. I like to count. He was a classic OCD counter. Checkers are people who become overwhelmed with anxiety about the uncertainty about whether they've done something that they should have done. So for example, if I had been using the stove at my house and then I went to bed later on, I might lay in bed thinking about whether or not I actually turned off all the burners on the stove. and I can't think about anything else. This thought becomes an obsession, and the only way I can deal with it is to get up, go downstairs, and check all the burners, make sure everything is completely in the off position. I breathe a brief sigh of relief, go back to bed, and then I start thinking about again. Did I really get them all? Am I remembering that I turned off every one of them, or am I just remembering that I was thinking about turning them off? Just to be safe, I'll get up and check again. But then it never ends, so you're checking, checking, checking. Obsessive cleaners are people that are overwhelmed with anxiety about germs or dirt, and they will wash their hands all day long, and they'll take multiple showers, and they're afraid of going places where they might get contaminated. There's a very nice video that shows how this works. There's a young woman who suffers from OCD that you can watch and listen to in the video. You can see the video by clicking on the link on this slide, but there's also a link to the same video on the web page for the module for this course. Avoidance is just what it sounds like. You're obsessed with the fear of coming into contact with something, so you won't go places where you think there might be dogs, or you won't step on cracks in sidewalks, or there's something that you compulsively avoid. Somatoform disorders are something that occurs when a person gets a very serious physical symptom. There seems to have something physically wrong with them, but when doctors look into it, they can't find any apparent cause for it. And the somatization that occurs, the specific disorder, usually is some kind of pain, especially a pain in the neck or the back. You may have heart symptoms. You feel like your heart is racing or palpitating. You may have gastrointestinal problems. I want to emphasize that the person is not faking it. The person is not pretending to have these problems. They are actually experiencing real physical symptoms. In an extreme form, this is something that might take the form of a conversion disorder. The person may actually go blind or deaf or even become paralyzed in response to the overwhelming levels of anxiety that they're experiencing. Conversion disorders often occur in response to a very traumatic event in a person's life. Another form of anxiety disorder is something called dissociative disorder, where the person kind of separates themselves from themselves in order to deal with anxiety. In dissociative amnesia, the person temporarily forgets everything about themselves. They don't know their name, they don't know any of the people around them, they don't have any memories of their personal life. This is the kind of amnesia you often see in soap operas and other TV shows. It usually only lasts a couple of hours, but it can last a day or two. Dissociative fugue states are very similar, but in addition to having amnesia, the person actually physically goes somewhere else. They get on a bus and they travel to a distant city, and they get off the bus not having any clue who they are or how they got there. The most extreme version of this is something called the dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. This is the thing that you often see featured in movies, where an individual may have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different personalities lurking within themselves, and they switch from one personality to the other in a very unpredictable way, and the different individuals locked inside don't even know about each other. And this is a way of a person escaping from their anxiety by becoming somebody completely different. Dissociative identity disorder is very rare. Most therapists have never seen one in their entire life. There's some debate in the field as to whether it's a real disorder. But for the time being, it is still listed in the DSM-5, and therefore an official classification that can be made.